I watched the color drain from his face the moment I placed that manila envelope on the table in front of him. His hands started shaking before he even opened it, and I thought to myself, 31 years of keeping receipts finally paid off. My name is Margaret Calloway. I am 64 years old. I spent 3 decades as a certified public accountant for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio, before I retired 2 years ago. I have one daughter, Claire, who is the most extraordinary person I have ever known. And on the night her future father-in-law stood up in front of 250 guests and called her a charity case in a silk dress, I decided that a woman who spent her entire career following the money could find it going somewhere it should not. But I am getting ahead of myself. It started 18 months ago, on a Sunday afternoon in April. Claire drove up to my house in that little red Honda she has had since college, the one with the dent on the passenger door she keeps promising to fix. She came through the back door the way she always does, dropped her bag on the kitchen chair, and stood there with both hands wrapped around nothing, like she was trying to hold something invisible steady. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something." I turned the stove down and gave her my full attention. His name is Daniel Hargrove. He works in urban planning for the city. We have been seeing each other for 4 months. I know I should have told you sooner, but I wanted to make sure it was real first. 4 months. I kept my expression neutral. "Tell me about him." "He is thoughtful," she said. "He is patient. He actually listens when I talk, like he is taking notes. He volunteers on weekends at the Housing Coalition. His family is—" She paused there. "His family is what?" "Established. His father, Gerald Hargrove, owns Hargrove Properties. They develop commercial real estate across the Midwest. His mother, Diane, she runs a private art foundation. They are very, too particular. I knew the name Hargrove. Anyone in Columbus finance circles knew that name. Gerald Hargrove had built his first strip mall at 28 and had not stopped since. He had the kind of wealth that required a staff to manage the staff. I smiled at my daughter. "Tell me more about Daniel." That was enough for that Sunday. But over the weeks that followed, I paid attention. Claire talked about Daniel the way you talk about something you are terrified of losing carefully, with both hands. She mentioned dinners at the Hargrove estate. She mentioned Diane asking about her graduate degree, her salary, her 5-year plan, with the pleasant relentlessness of someone conducting an audit. I met Daniel in June. He came to my house for dinner and brought wine he had clearly researched specifically for the occasion, an Ohio Riesling from a small vineyard, thoughtful in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. He helped clear the table without being asked. He laughed at my stories about tax season the way people laugh when they actually find something funny rather than when they are trying to make an impression. I liked him. I still like him. Whatever happened with his family was never about Daniel. Claire and Daniel got engaged in September. He called me the morning before he proposed, which I did not expect, and asked if he could have a few minutes. He told me that he loved my daughter and that he understood what she had survived. She had lost her father to a stroke when she was 19, had put herself through nursing school, working double shifts, had built everything she had from a foundation of sheer stubbornness and quiet grace. He said he knew that what he was asking was not just for her hand but for her whole story, and he wanted to be worthy of it. I told him he already was. He proposed that evening at the Botanical Garden. Claire called me from the parking lot, crying so hard I could barely understand her. I sat in my kitchen with the phone pressed against my ear and cried right along with her. The trouble began at the engagement dinner. The Hargroves hosted it at their home in New Albany, one of those neighborhoods where the houses sit so far back from the road you cannot see them from the street, where the lawns look like they are mowed with rulers. The dining room alone was larger than my entire first apartment. Diane greeted me at the door in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She was warm in the way that expensive hotels are warm, polished, precise, and fundamentally impersonal. "Margaret," she said, squeezing my hand with both of hers, "we are just so happy to finally meet Claire's mother. Daniel has told us you were an accountant?" "I am," I said, "retired now." "How practical," she said, and then she turned to the next arriving guest with the same manufactured delight. I found my seat at the table. Gerald Hargrove was already holding court at the head of it, a broad man in his early 70s with silver hair and the particular confidence of someone who had never once been told no. He acknowledged me with a nod, the way you acknowledge furniture that has been rearranged into a slightly inconvenient position. Dinner was fine. The food was extraordinary. I watched Claire navigate it all, which fork, which topics, which opinions were safe, with the careful attention of someone walking across a floor they were not entirely sure would hold. She was magnificent, she always is, but I could see what it was costing her. The toasts came after dessert. Daniel spoke first, and he was perfect, funny, and warm, and completely focused on Claire in a way that made the room quiet down without meaning to. Then Diane made a lovely speech about welcoming Claire into the family, all surface and no depth, pleasant as wallpaper. Then Gerald stood up. He spoke for several minutes about the Hargrove legacy, about what his family had built across 3 generations, about the responsibility that came with the name. He was a man who had clearly been the most interesting person in most of the rooms he had occupied, and he spoke accordingly. Then he turned toward Claire, and the register shifted. "I have to say," he began, "that when Daniel first told us about Claire, we had some questions." He chuckled, and a few guests chuckled with him. Not about Claire herself, of course, but about fit, about whether someone from he paused, tilted his head, smiled the smile of a man choosing his words to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. A different kind of background would be comfortable in our world. He looked at Claire directly. "But Claire has impressed us. She works hard. She is resourceful. And I think she understands that marrying into this family means growing into something larger than where she started." He raised his glass. "To Claire," he said. "May she rise to meet the occasion." The room drank. Most of them were smiling because they did not understand what had just happened, or chose not to. Claire's smile stayed on her face like something pinned there. Daniel had gone very still beside her, and I sat across the table with my champagne glass raised and my jaw aching from keeping it in a neutral position, thinking about every number I had ever tracked, every discrepancy I had ever flagged, every lie I had ever found buried in a spreadsheet. I drove home in silence. I did not turn the radio on. I sat in my living room with all the lights off for a long time. Then I turned the lights on and went to work. I want to explain something about being an accountant for 31 years. Most people assume the job is about numbers. It is not, really. It is about patterns. Numbers are just the language the patterns speak, and I had spent 3 decades learning to read that language well enough to hear the things people were actively trying not to say. I started with public records, property filings, corporate registrations, court documents. I had access to the same county databases I had used throughout my career, and I knew how to move through them efficiently. Within the first week, I found 3 things that caught my attention. First, Hargrove Properties had 3 active civil suits pending, all from subcontractors claiming non-payment on completed commercial projects. The amounts were not trivial. Combined, they were pushing $4 million. Second, 2 of the Hargrove family's commercial properties in Franklin County had tax liens that had been released within the past year paid off, but the kind of scramble payment that suggested cash flow had been genuinely tight. Third, a subsidiary company registered under a slightly different name, Hargrove Development Partners LLC, rather than Hargrove Properties Inc., had been quietly dissolved 14 months ago. The timing correlated with the beginning of the contractor disputes. These were not proof of anything criminal on their own. Businesses had disputes, cash flow problems happened, but the pattern of them together felt like a house where too many doors were locked. I made some calls. I still had colleagues in the finance and legal community, people who had moved through the same circles I had for decades. I was careful and indirect, asking about Hargrove Properties in the context of a hypothetical client due diligence. What came back was consistent. The company was overextended. Gerald had made several large bets on commercial development projects over the past 5 years that had not performed as projected. He was, by multiple accounts, in a significantly more fragile position than the Hargrove name suggested. But that alone was not what pushed me to act. What pushed me to act happened on a Tuesday in November, 6 weeks before the wedding. Claire had asked me to drop off some items at the apartment she and Daniel were renting while their new house was being finalized. Daniel was at work. Claire was picking up a double shift at the hospital. I had a key for emergencies. I let myself in, left the box on the kitchen island, and was pulling the door shut behind me when I heard voices coming up the stairwell. Gerald's voice, unmistakable, and another man's I did not recognize. Something stopped me. I do not know what exactly. Professional instinct, maybe? The particular quality of a voice that is saying something it does not want overheard. I stepped back inside and stood very still in the entry. They came in Gerald and a man I later identified as his business attorney, a senior partner at a downtown firm named Russell Pratt. They did not see me standing behind the half-open coat closet door. "I need this marriage to close before any of it goes public," Gerald said. He said it the way you say something you have said before, rehearsed past the point of feeling it. Daniel marrying a nurse is actually useful. She earns a stable income. If the worst happens with the properties, they have an income stream that is not connected to the company. She is not going to be asking complicated financial questions, Russ. She does not have the background for it. Pratt said something too low for me to catch. Gerald's response was not low at all. The investigation is not going to touch us personally if we restructure before spring. The personal assets are protected as long as we move the properties into the trust before the county files. Daniel does not know the extent of it. I need him married and settled before I tell him. Claire is not sophisticated enough to complicate things. She is exactly what we need right now. I did not move. I did not breathe. Not really. Not sophisticated enough to complicate things. Exactly what we need right now. My daughter, who had worked double shifts to put herself through nursing school, who had sat at that dinner table and smiled while this man told 200 people she had come from somewhere lesser, who had done everything right and was about to walk into a marriage being used as a financial instrument by a man who thought she was too simple to see it. I left before they moved further into the apartment. I took the stairs. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel and my eyes on nothing. Then I called my accountant friend, Dennis Vogel, who had retired from the state auditor's office 3 years ago and who owed me a favor from a time I had not reported an error in his firm's filings that would have cost him considerably. "Dennis," I said, "I need to know if there is a county investigation into Hargrove Properties and what it involves." He called me back 2 days later. "Margaret," he said, "where did you find this thread? Just tell me what you know." There is a Franklin County investigation into potential violations of the Ohio Commercial Development Transparency Act. Specifically, Hargrove Properties allegedly misrepresented the financial status of 3 commercial projects to secure bridge loans from 2 regional banks. The misrepresentation involved inflated projected returns and the omission of existing liabilities. They are looking at fraud in the inducement. It is not public yet. Could be 30 days, could be 90. How serious? If it goes to charges, Gerald Hargrove is looking at federal bank fraud exposure on top of the state violations. His personal assets may be protected if the trust transfer goes through, but it is a narrow window and the timing will be scrutinized. I thanked Dennis and sat with that information for a long time. Then I started making preparations. I want to say this clearly. I agonized over it. I talked to my closest friend, a retired social worker named Patricia, who has known me since our children were in preschool together. I told her everything. I sat at her kitchen table with both hands around a mug of tea, and I said, "I know what I know. I do not know what to do with it." Patricia looked at me for a long moment. She said, "If a patient came to Claire's floor with symptoms she recognized, and she said nothing because the diagnosis was uncomfortable, what would we call that?" I already knew the answer. I had known it since the parking garage. The question was not whether to tell Claire. The question was how. If I told her privately, she would confront Daniel, who did not know or she would not believe me, because she was in love, and love has its own immune system against the things that threaten it. I needed her to see it herself. I needed it to be undeniable. I knew exactly when I would have my moment. Gerald Hargrove had insisted on giving a speech at the rehearsal dinner. He was that kind of man, the kind who required a podium at every occasion he attended. I had been assigned a speaking slot immediately after him. The rehearsal dinner was held at a private dining room at a restaurant in downtown Columbus, 60 guests. I arrived early and sat near the front. I had a leather portfolio in my lap that I had organized with the precision of a client presentation. The public court filings, the summary of the contractor disputes, the tax lien history. Dennis's written summary of the county investigation framed as a matter of public record, and the transcript I had written, as accurately as I could reconstruct it, of what I had overheard in that apartment hallway. I wore the blue dress Claire had helped me pick out for the occasion. I wanted to look like someone's mother. I wanted to look exactly like what I was. Gerald gave his speech first. It was the engagement dinner speech, with better material, the same architecture of condescension dressed in warmer language. He talked about Daniel's accomplishments, about the Hargrove family's place in the community, about legacy. He looked at Claire while he spoke about the kind of woman who understood that some opportunities needed to be earned. He smiled at me across the room with the charitable warmth of a man who had never once questioned his own right to define the terms of belonging. And then he said, "I want to be honest. When Daniel told us Claire was a nurse, a good, hard-working nurse, I had to ask myself whether she understood what she was stepping into. Our world has demands. It has expectations. But I have come to believe that Claire is adaptable. That is perhaps her greatest quality." He raised his glass. "To Claire, may she prove us right." The room drank. Claire's hand found Daniel's under the table. I saw her press it once and release it like she was setting something down. The host moved to me. "Margaret Calloway," he said, Claire's mother. I stood up. I smiled at the room. I picked up my portfolio. "Thank you, Gerald," I said. That was a very revealing speech. A few polite laughs. I said, "I spent 31 years as a CPA. For most of that time, I did forensic work, which means I found things in financial records that people had worked very hard to conceal. I am good at it. I am, in fact, very good at it. And when someone tells my daughter she is not from the right background, I tend to get curious about what background is actually being defended." The room had gone completely still. Gerald said, "Margaret." I said, "I have not finished." I opened the portfolio. I said, "Hargrove Properties currently has 3 active civil suits for non-payment to subcontractors, totaling approximately $3.8 million. There are 2 recently resolved tax liens on commercial properties in Franklin County. A subsidiary company was dissolved 14 months ago in a manner consistent with liability insulation." I looked at Gerald directly. "More relevantly," I said, "there is an active Franklin County investigation into potential federal bank fraud involving misrepresentation of financial status to secure bridge loans. I am not sharing anything that is not already a matter of record or active public process. I am simply sharing it with the people in this room who have a right to know." Gerald was on his feet. "This is inappropriate. This is Margaret. Sit down," I said. "And I want to share one more thing. Because the financial situation matters, but it is not the thing that made me stand up tonight." I turned to look at my daughter. Claire was watching me with wide eyes, very still, her hand back in her own lap. I said, "Approximately 6 weeks ago, I was in your apartment dropping off some things you had asked for. I heard a conversation in the hallway between Gerald and his attorney. In that conversation, Gerald described this marriage as useful. He said Claire earns a stable income that is not connected to the company. He said she would not ask complicated financial questions because she does not have the background for it. He described her as exactly what we need right now." I heard the quiet before I heard the noise. Daniel had turned to look at his father with an expression I recognized. It was the face of someone running back through a long series of memories and arriving at a conclusion they had been avoiding. Gerald said, "You have no idea what you are talking about." I said, "I have 31 years of knowing exactly what I am talking about." I set the portfolio on the table. I looked at the journalist I knew was covering the dinner for a Columbus business publication. She had been invited as a family friend of the Hargroves, and I had called her 3 days earlier to make sure she would be there. I said, "Everything in there is documentable. I trust it will be used responsibly." Then I sat down. I cannot tell you exactly what happened in the next hour because most of it was other people's to experience. I know that Daniel and Gerald moved to a private corner and had a conversation that involved raised voices I could hear through the wall. I know that Diane sat at the table with a particular stillness that told me she had suspected something for a long time and had chosen not to look. I know that Claire came and sat next to me and did not say anything for several minutes, and then put her head on my shoulder, and I put my arm around her, and neither of us said a word. The rehearsal dinner ended early. The wedding was postponed. Not canceled, postponed. This was the part I had not fully anticipated, and it was the part that required me to be humble about what I had done. Daniel was not Gerald. Daniel had not known the extent of his father's situation. He had not orchestrated any of it. He was a young man discovering that the ground beneath his family had been hollow for years, and that discovery was happening in the middle of what was supposed to be the happiest season of his life. Claire and Daniel talked for 2 weeks. Not to me, not to Gerald, not to anyone else, just to each other. I gave them space because it was theirs to occupy. I will not pretend those 2 weeks were comfortable. I sat with the possibility that I had destroyed something real and good in the name of exposing something real and wrong, and I held that possibility as seriously as it deserved. On a Friday evening in January, Claire called me. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something." I waited. "We are going to get married in April. Small ceremony, 30 people. At the botanical garden where he proposed." She paused. "He told me everything he knew, which was some but not all. He is angry at his father. He may not be for a long time, but he is not his father. You already knew that." "I did," I said. She said, "I am not angry at you for what you did. I am not even angry at the timing. I think I needed to see it happen in a room full of people because I needed it to be real in a way that could not be walked back. If you had told me privately, I would have found a way to explain it away. I was already explaining things away." I said, "I was so afraid I was going to lose you." She said, "You raised me, Mom. I am not going anywhere." The Franklin County investigation became public in February. Gerald Hargrove was named in a federal complaint related to bank fraud in March. His attorney negotiated a cooperation agreement that significantly reduced his personal exposure, but Hargrove Properties was placed in receivership. The company Gerald had spent 40 years building was being liquidated to compensate the banks and the subcontractors who had never been paid. Diane did not file for divorce. I do not know what that means for either of them, and it is not my business to have an opinion about it. Claire and Daniel were married in April at the Botanical Garden, exactly where he had proposed. 30 guests. Her friend from nursing school was the maid of honor. The ceremony was 20 minutes long and entirely personal, every word of it chosen by the two of them together. I stood in the front row in a dress I had bought specifically for that day, pale green, because Claire said it matched my eyes, and watched my daughter marry a man who had, when the ground fell out from under his entire understanding of his family, chosen her completely. He still comes to Sunday dinner. He does the dishes. He asks me questions about my work history with genuine curiosity, the way someone asks who is trying to understand where a person has been. Last month, he brought me a book about forensic accounting he had found at a used bookstore with a note inside that said, "Now I know where Claire gets it." I keep the note on my refrigerator. Gerald was sentenced in October. 18 months, federal minimum security, restitution to the banks. The subcontractors received partial settlement through the receivership proceedings. A woman named Helen Bosworth, who had run a small tile contracting business in Westerville, wrote to the business publication that had covered the story and mentioned a retired accountant who had stood up at a rehearsal dinner with a leather folder. Helen's company had been owed $260,000 for work on a Hargrove commercial project completed 3 years ago. The receivership returned approximately 80% of it. She said it was the difference between closing and staying open. I read that and sat with it for a long time. The journalist forwarded me Helen's contact information and asked if she could share mine. I told her yes. Helen and I have had coffee twice. She is 61 years old. She started her tile business after her first marriage ended and has grown it to 14 employees. She is not a woman who needs anyone to call her remarkable, but she is. Claire is pregnant. She told me on a Sunday afternoon in November, sitting at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and I thought of the April afternoon 18 months earlier when she had sat in the same chair with her hands around nothing, trying to hold something invisible steady. She is due in June. I am 64 years old, and I spend my retirement doing whatever I please, which mostly means reading, cooking for people I love, and occasionally being asked by Claire's friends whether I would look at their fiancé's family's business filings. I say yes every time. I know what I am good at. I have thought a great deal about the word sophistication. Gerald Hargrove used it as a weapon. He decided what it meant. He decided who had it, and he used that definition to arrange people below him. What he meant by it was familiarity with wealth, comfort with a certain kind of table, the right last name preceding the right zip code. What I think it actually means is this: the capacity to see clearly, especially when seeing clearly is inconvenient, to follow a pattern past the point where it becomes comfortable, to look at a number and understand what it is telling you even when the person who produced the number is hoping you will not. By that definition, the woman who was not sophisticated enough to complicate things has never existed. I have a framed photo on my desk from Claire's wedding day. She is standing in the garden with Daniel, both of them mid-laugh at something just outside the frame. She has her head tilted back. She looks like a woman in the exact right place at the exact right moment in her own story. I look at it every morning. That is enough. That has always been enough. If you are watching this, and someone powerful has told you that you come from somewhere lesser, that you are not the right fit, that your background is something to rise above, I want you to hear this from a 64-year-old woman who spent 3 decades inside the financial records of people who thought their money made them. Untouchable. The number always tells the truth eventually, and so does the woman who knows how to read it.